Morning. Appreciate the presence of each one. We have a good number in attendance, and for those who are visiting with us, want to again say how much we appreciate your presence and hope we can encourage you while you're in our number. This morning, as we study from the Scriptures, it is my intention to give an encouragement as we've been studying over the past few months in our Sunday morning auditorium class about being still in our souls, and that's based on our theme of this year, Take Time to Be Holy. And being God's people and attending ourselves to those things which are indeed holy and righteous before God should indeed give us a peace and a calmness within us, something that we can rely upon and something that we can go to, that we can indeed flee to for refuge. And so this morning we're going to be talking about Jehovah Tsuri. Many years ago we looked at many of the names of God. This was not one that we reviewed during that time, but as I was studying this week upon this, it gave great comfort and something that I hope will be encouraging to you. To begin that, I want you to think about Alcatraz, the prison. You remember Alcatraz is that place that was called the Rock. If you're a fan of the Andy Griffith Show, he called their prison the Rock also. But you remember that term, the Rock, when it became synonymous with Alcatraz, was a place that was a person would be unable to escape. That once you went there, you were there permanently. There was no respite from being there. When we think about that term, it's meant to be something that is secure, something where there's nothing that can penetrate, and something indeed that we can trust in. And so as we look upon our God this morning and look at various verses, I hope that we get that idea. So if you're ready for your 3 words, let's see the notebooks held up real high this morning. All right, very cool. We're going to go through these words more as we go through the lesson, but trouble, prayer, and deliverance. One thing that we're going to notice is that when we go through these various verses that we're going to be reading about those who call upon God as being their rock, one thing that you're going to see over and over and over again is there's some type of calamity, some type of trouble or turmoil, some type of storm, some type of difficulty that they're going through. And in the midst of that, their first response is to call upon God, to lift up their voices in prayer and supplications to Him. And God hears their prayers and God answers and provides deliverance from those difficulties and those trials and their problems. It may not be physically that they have been separated from them, because we all know that trials and tribulations, storms are always surrounding us. As we're going to see in just a moment, they're kind of like waves that are always beating upon the seashore. However, we still have deliverance because we have a God who is our rock. There's a couple of different terms that are used in the Old Testament to refer to a rock. There's one that's C-E-L-A, Selah. This word means a high and lofty place. It was used of fortresses and places of refuge that were high, that were above other places. Tsuri is another term that is used for rock in the Old Testament, and it's used for a place that's almost like the precipice of a cliff, or a place where it is hard to get to, a craggy type of place, a sharp place, a place where it is immovable and it's so large that it cannot be penetrated, it cannot be assaulted, and it cannot be uprooted. So there's a couple different words. We're going to be mainly looking at this one of Tsuri, but when you go through the verses that we're going to be looking at, they're interchangeable many times. They're both used oftentimes to refer to God. I want to read you first this quote. What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. The history of mankind will probably show that no people has ever risen above its religion, and spiritual history will positively demonstrate that no religion has ever been greater than its idea of God. When we were going through our classes and talking about the peace that we're supposed to have, it focused around who God is and also our understanding of who God is. Because as was just quoted from A.W. Tozer here, was something that tells us what we know to be true. That when we think about God and what we think about God indeed shapes and forms everything about us. Every interaction that we have, both as individuals and even collectively, is shaped by who we think God is and what God means to us. And if that is distorted, it shows itself in every relationship that we have. Both the relationship that we have with our own understanding of ourselves, the excuses that we make, the things that we indulge in, the things that we refrain from. Even to our relationships with our children, our spouses, the places that we work, and our community at large. And that's why it's so important to have the correct understanding of who God is. Throughout the scriptures, there's this image of God being portrayed as being a solid and dependable rock. And as early as Exodus chapter 17, verses 1 through 7. And if you remember in Exodus chapter 17, that they have come out of Egyptian bondage, that they're going through the wilderness, and they're without water. And they become distraught, and they begin to complain against God and against Moses. And at the end of this account in verse 7, the question is asked, is God among us or not? That's what God says that they were in reality saying. Is God among us or not? And so the question really is, did God actually bring these people out? Did he send the 10 plagues upon Egypt? Did he put them through all the trials that they were going through and then lead them through the desert, part the Red Sea, destroy the Egyptian army, bring them across on dry ground to the other side, promise them all these things about a land flowing with milk and honey, only to let them die of thirst? Is that what God was doing? And that's what God is saying, that this is what you said. Is God among us or not? So you think about the application that first and foremost that this would have. That God tells them, strike the rock, and I'll bring forth water. He puts them in a place where it seems that everything is without hope. And then he brings them to something that you do not think that you would get water from. He doesn't lead them to a pond. He doesn't lead them to a stream. He doesn't lead them to a valley where the water might hopefully be traveling through it. He doesn't tell them to cut open certain things to find water. He takes them to a rock, a place where you're not going to find water, and says, strike the rock, the Tsuri, and you'll get water to drink. Now you make the application. How many times does it seem like everything is hopeless, that there seems to be no end in sight? And instead of reflecting on everything that God has delivered you from, everything that God has been with you from beginning to end, you're brought to this place, and it's almost like you're asking the question again, is God with me or not? And every time I get thirsty, I have that thought. Every time I get hungry, I have that thought. Every time I feel like I am poor and desolate, I get that thought. Every time I'm afraid, I get that thought. Is God with me or not? And I forget everything that God has done. Has God brought you through all of those things just to leave you desolate in that moment that you need Him? God answers here in the most improbable of ways to say you cannot trust in streams and branches and rivers. You can't trust in any of those things, but you can trust in me. I am dependable. Strike the rock and the water will come. We go to the right source. Also in Deuteronomy chapter 32, and I want us to read these verses. Deuteronomy 32, as Moses is at the end of his life and he's recounting the law that God has given and all the great promises that God had made, we have what is referred to as the Song of Moses. And in verses 2 through 4 of Deuteronomy 32, Moses says this, "Let my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, as raindrops on the tender herb and as showers on the grass. For I proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God. He is the Tsuri, He is the rock. His work is perfect. For all His ways are justice, a God of truth and without injustice. Righteous and upright is He." And then as he goes through all the different aspects of their relationship with God throughout this song, skip down to verses 36 through 39. And he lets it be known that they're going to turn from Him. They're going to forsake Him and go to idolatry and seek after different gods. And he says in verse 36, "For the Lord will judge His people and have compassion on His servants when He sees that their power is gone and there is no one remaining, bond or free. He will say, where are their gods, the rock, the Tsuri, in which they sought refuge, who ate at the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their drink offerings. Let them rise and help you and be your refuge." In verse 39, he makes it clear, "Now see that I, even I, am He, and there is no God besides me. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal, nor is there any who can deliver from my hand." God makes it clear that when people forsake Him, this true, dependable, solid rock that cannot be moved, that they forsake him, but they go after these other gods. These other gods, by the way, that he's talking about, they offer these sacrifices because they would build their altars and build their gods out of these tiny rocks and stones that can be manipulated and changed and fashioned into whatever they wanted to. And God says, I'm going to say to them, I'm going to mock them when their power is gone and they finally understand that there is no deliverance anywhere else. When you finally get to the bottom, when you're like the prodigal son wanting to eat the very things that's being fed to the hogs, and you realize your condition, when you come to yourself, God says, at that moment, I'm going to mock you and say, so where is that Tsuri? Where is that immovable rock that you've been looking for? Where is that immovable thing, that solid, dependable thing that you are trusting in? Understand this, there is no other God but me. Sometimes to understand just how great God is, we have to understand how small and insignificant we all are. Amen. That God is a great and mighty fortress, a place of refuge and strength. He is dependable. He is reliable. He cannot fail, nor can he be conquered. And because of that, that's where we're supposed to be going. So this image of God that they've had throughout their time is one that's supposed to provide for them safety and security, that there's no one that can invade, there's no one that can take away, and there's nothing else to trust in. But God is everything to trust in. And so the psalmist, when he goes through these, and even the prophets will extol the great virtue and promises of God. Isaiah 26 and verse 3 says this, you will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you. Trust in the Lord forever, for in Yah the Lord is everlasting strength. The word strength in that verse is Tsuri, is rock. The Lord is the everlasting rock. Literally, that verse means the Lord is the rock of ages. That's where the song and the idea comes from. And God will keep him in perfect peace, complete peace, whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you, the rock of ages, the one that does not fade, the one that does not age, the one that does not decay, that does not wither, does not falter. He will keep him in perfect peace. We come to the New Testament in Matthew 7, verses 24 and 25, and it teaches us that whoever hears these sayings of mine as Jesus is speaking and does them, Jesus says, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall because it was founded on the rock. In other words, the storms of life will not cause a person to fall and falter because his house is built on something that's dependable. And there's so many times that when we look at these passages in Matthew chapter 7 about the false teachers and the false ways and the broad way and the narrow gate and these things, we understand that it is indeed about being on guard against false doctrines and false teachings and these false ways of man. But I think we forget what it actually means for us is that it means nothing can cause us to falter. There are consequences of evil and false ways, just as there are consequences of good and righteous ways. Jesus says, listen to what I tell you and do what I tell you, and you will be just fine. The storms will not cause you to fall off the rock. The storm can't blow your house off that rock. Your house is not going to be destroyed because it's founded on the rock. But if you build it on shifting sand, on something that's easily moved about and manipulated, and that's how we're always trying to order our lives, is by things that can be easily shifted and manipulated. We're always trying to do that. Instead upon one thing that's sure, one thing that's secure, one thing and one thing only. Just as we read from the Old Testament, know this, that there is no other God but me. Just as there's no other rock but listening to what Jesus says and doing it. You will be just fine. The storms can howl, the pestilence can come, the trouble can abound. But brother and sister, you will be just fine because you're founded on the rock. God has given you something that is much more secure and eternal than flesh and blood, than the small trivialities of this life, and something that is much more meaningful. Back in Isaiah chapter 28 and verse 16, therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I lay in Zion a stone for a foundation, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. Whoever believes will not act hastily. Notice that this prophecy about Jesus, that Jesus had made this statement, you do what it is that I tell you to do, and you will be like a house that's built upon a rock. This is what was prophesied long ago concerning the Lord and his church and the way in which we are built upon that foundation. But notice the thing that it says about there. It is indeed a foundation. It is a stone for a foundation. It is a tried stone. In other words, it's been something that's been time tested and proven through the storms and the difficulties and those who try to destroy it. It is a precious cornerstone. It's not one that's just put there, but it's one that is very precious indeed, because everything can be measured off of that cornerstone, and you know that it is accurate, it is correct, and it is without fault. There is no deviation from what is true from that precious cornerstone. It is a sure foundation. It's one that you can trust in and know that when you build upon it, that you can put all of your weight upon it. You don't have to worry about the settling issues that we often do with pretty much everything that's built here in Texas, I guess. But this is a stone that's not going to have that fault. It's not going to have that problem. Whoever believes in him will not act hastily. Some of your versions may say that they will not be put to shame. What it means is you're not going to find yourself in a sudden panic. You know what that's like? Sudden panic. Whoever trusts in this cornerstone is not going to fall into a sudden panic. They're not going to act hastily. They're not going to find themselves embarrassed or shamed because they put their trust into something that was suddenly snatched out from under their feet. The thing that most often puts us into a sudden panic is because we trusted in something and then all of a sudden it was snatched out from under us like a rug. That is not the way it is with our God. They are not going to act hastily. They'll feel so secure as to not abandon that place of security. When I was a kid, there was a series for days, it seemed like, of thunderstorms that were rolling through. And we had this German Shepherd dog come running up into the yard. And he was terrified. Every time the thunder would crash, he would go to barking and whimpering and would run around. He was losing his mind because of the storm. We put him into this basically a garage-type area. He had food, he had water, he had warmth, he had safety, and we put him inside there so maybe he would feel secure and not be so afraid. And this dog, the next time that the thunder crashed again, broke loose from his chain and ran right back out into the storm. Now, we realize that that dog has no sense. But let me ask you this. Do we have any sense? Because what do we do? What do we do? We know that God is the place of safety. God is the place of security. He's given us everything that we need to be safe and secure. And every time the storm crashes and the thunder cracks, what do? We jump off of the rock and we go running right back out into the storm. We act hastily. We act without good sense. Because we know that God is the place of safety. So why do we keep living in the storm? Why do we keep putting ourselves there? Why do we keep doubting our God that we run from him? If we trust in the cornerstone, we will not act hastily. I want you to think back about some of the things that you've had in your life. And for some of us, we don't have to think back very far. I mean, 3 years ago, what was the state of affairs in our own minds about things? And how many of us were acting hastily about the things that we were hearing on the news and the broadcasts and the different experts one way or another, and how it made us act and treat others? There's been things that's happened in our own lives that cause us to act hastily when things don't go our way. This morning in Bible class, Sean was speaking about a co-worker that had changed his whole identity where he couldn't even function correctly at work because of the person that they thought was their rock, their anchor, their rock, had been removed. And now what are they supposed to do? How many of you seen that with a spouse or a child? Who is the person who's your rock that you lean on? God says there's only one, and it is He. And if that's not the one that we're trusting in, we're going to keep acting hastily when difficulties and trials come. We need to be honest about ourselves, and we need to realize that this rock that we're talking about is one that is tried and true. He is a rock that is about protection. The other verses that we looked at were talking about it being about God being a foundation. These next verses are talking about God being a fortress and a place that we can run to in our refuge. Psalm 18, and many of these verses are going to come from Psalm 18. And if you want to put a cross-reference in your Bible, Psalm 18 and 2 Samuel 22 are mirror images of one another. In 2 Samuel 22, it is about David who is nearing the end of his life, and it seems that either he's been writing or he's been singing this song throughout his life, and now here at the end he sings it again, or maybe this is the particular time. But it's nearing the end of his life, it seems, and he's looking back and he's praising God and talking about how God is worthy to be praised for all the times that he has been there to deliver him. Psalm 18 even gives you an inspired precursor to what the psalm is about. And it gives an extended one about God delivering David from all of his trouble and from the hand of Saul. And what you're going to notice, as I said from the three words at the beginning, is that when we read these verses, there's three things I want you to pay attention to. That he's going to talk about his trouble, he's going to talk about his prayer, and he's going to talk about his deliverance. Psalm 18, verse 1, I will love you, O Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock. That is not the word Tsuri. That is that other word, Celeb, my high place, my high fortress. My rock and my fortress, my high fortress is what's being talked about, and my deliverer. My God, my Tsuri. There's the rock that we're talking about. My God, my strength, in whom I will trust. My shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I will call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. He looks forward to the idea that he knows that in his trouble, in his time of trial, being pursued like people like Saul, from the Philistines, from his own son Absalom, from all these different people who have had David in their crosshairs, he is going to his God over and over again. And to you, my Lord, you are my strength. He says, God is my strength, my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, my strength, one I can trust, my shield, the horn of my salvation, a stronghold, worthy to be praised. He can save me from my enemies. David knew where his help came from. Verses 4 through 7, the Lord begins to, he talks about his trouble even more and how the Lord begins to answer. The pangs of death surrounded me, and the floods of ungodliness made me afraid. That term, that idea that floods of ungodliness is that term of waves of a sea that are constantly crashing upon that seashore. And this is how it was for David, that he felt completely engulfed and that he was drowning in his despair. And every time he felt like maybe he could get a breath, another wave of ungodliness was crashing down upon him. And how often do you feel that way? Every time you start to get your head above water, another wave comes crashing in. You open your mouth to get air and water fills it. And you feel like you're drowning in it. That's what David is talking about. And it's not just small problems. It is the pangs of death. It is ungodliness. The sorrows of Sheol, the grave, surrounded me. The snares of death confronted me. In my distress, I called upon the Lord and cried out to my God. He heard my voice from his temple, and my cry came before him, even to his ears. The earth shook and trembled. The foundations of the hills also quaked and were shaken because he was angry. God heard the prayers of David. God knew that David was going through these things, and it was coming from the hands of others, and his God was angry. And in the next several verses, you see how God answers. The earth shakes beneath his feet. There's smoke, there's thunderings and lightnings, and all these different ways in which being used to symbolize how it was that God was answering what David had said because God was angry. Brethren, when we pray to our God in the midst of our troubles, do not think that our God answers in a cold and uncaring and unfeeling way. Our God can get angry. And our God can be angry at what you're going through. When you've got all those floods crashing upon you, when you feel like you can't breathe, God becomes angry, just like you do over your children. Our God answers, and our God makes the difference. Verses 16 through 19 of that same chapter. He sent from above. He took me. He drew me out of many waters. He delivered me from my strong enemy, from those who hated me. For they were too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my calamity, but the Lord was my support. He also brought me out to a broad place. He delivered me, and this is why, because he delighted in me. You go through the scriptures and you see examples of this over and over and over again. I want you to think of Hannah in 1 Samuel chapters 1 and 2, and how it was that she was one of a couple of wives that this man had. And this other wife who was able to have children ridiculed and mocked and tormented Hannah because of her situation of not being able to have children. And Hannah went to her God, and she prayed to her God, and she trusted that her God was going to listen and to answer her prayers. And in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, she says this, "And Hannah prayed and said, My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. I smile at my enemies, because I rejoice in your salvation. No one is holy like the Lord, for there is none besides you, nor is there any to soar, any rock like our God. There is no one that is like him." He reflects upon the gratitude and the love that is there because of the way in which God has listened and delivered over and over and over again. All those thunderings, all that smoke, and all those things that David described in Psalm 18 about God answering. David did none of that. Do we get that? David did none of that. David did not cause the thunder. David did not cause the earth to shake. David did not send the smoke and the fire and the thunder and the lightning. David did none of that. That was God. Even when David went out to Goliath, he said, "This battle belongs to the Lord." He was just an instrument in the hand of God. And that's where we need to see ourselves. It is God who answers. It is God who delivers. Stop trying to do it by yourself. Stop looking to yourself for all the answers. Stop looking to other men and gimmicks for the answers, because they're not. There's one God. There's only one to soar. That's who we trust in, and that's where our confidence is found. In Psalm 61, verses 1 through 4, "Hear my cry, O God, attend to my prayer. From the end of the earth, I will cry to you when my heart is overwhelmed. Lead me to the rock." Notice this phrase, "Lead me to the rock that is higher than I. For you have been a shelter for me, a strong tower from the enemy. I will abide in your tabernacle forever. I will trust in the shelter of your wings. There is trouble. I pray to my God delivers. The rock that is higher than I." We are not the rock. The rock that is higher than me. It means you're not the rock, because you're not any more steady than I am. It's the rock that's higher than I. God is the one who delivers. Psalm 62 that we read, "My soul waits silently for God alone." Oh, how I wish I could learn to do that. To just be quiet. To wait silently for God alone. To not act hastily. To not feel like I've got to get up all of a sudden and start doing something, because activity does not mean that I'm walking or running with God. It probably means I'm acting hastily. I'm like the dog that's afraid of the thunder, and I break loose from the place of safety, and I jump off of the rock and flee somewhere else. My expectation is from Him. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be moved. In God is my salvation and my glory. The rock of my strength and my refuge is in God. Trust in Him. This is a conversation he's having with his own soul. Trust in Him at all times. You people, pour out your heart before Him. God is a refuge for us. Surely men of low degree are a vapor. Men of high degree are a lie. Notice how this phrase is worded. If they are weighed on the scales, they are altogether lighter than vapor. Do not trust in oppression, nor vainly hope in robbery. If riches increase, do not set your heart on them. We need to understand and be able to answer the question, who indeed is my rock? Is it my spouse? Is it my job? Is it my bank account? What is it? Or is it in God? A few applications before we close. We need to learn how to pray when we're troubled. You know, the disciples went to Jesus and they asked him, teach us to pray like John taught his disciples. When I think about that phrase, I think sometimes when we ask this question and when we start looking at learning how to pray, we want to know what words to say. We want to know in what physical position we should be in. Should we be standing, kneeling, laying, or whatever? We start thinking about the environment that we find ourselves in, and all those things are good discussions. But this is not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about learning how to pray. Learning how to pray like Jesus did when he was in the garden. Learning how to pray like that, where the words are not the thing that is most important, but the submission to God's will is what's crucial and vital to get us through the time. Learn how to pray like that. Learn how to pray like the psalmist. You, my God, are my strength, my fortress, my shield. I will trust in no one else but you. Learning how to pray that way. Stop looking for gimmicks. Stop looking for the programs and the little phrases and ideas. All those things can be helpful, but they're meaningless if I don't truly believe that there is a rock that I can trust in. Because it becomes incantations, magical spells, and that's not where deliverance comes. We need to fully surrender to the Lord and to him alone. Not to someone else so that they may help us surrender to God. But fully surrender to him. And by surrender, I mean surrender. Stop it. Let go. That is so hard. But you got to let go. You've got to let it go. You've got to be done with it. You cannot cause the thunder and the lightning and the earth to move. You can't do any of that. Let God answer. Let God move the earth, because you can't do it. You have to surrender to him. And then courageously trust in that rock that cannot be moved. As we saw a moment ago, with that animal that just flees when it thunders, don't give up on what works. What works is this: studying your Bible. And as soon as I say that, what comes upon you? Tried that, didn't work. Don't abandon prayer. Tried that, didn't work. Don't abandon spending time with your brethren. Tried that, didn't work. These are the things where God shakes the earth. But you can be like the dog who hears the thunder and you can run. And how has that worked out for you? There is safety and security. Do not jump off of the rock. Do not get off of the foundation. Stay on that rock that does not move. We've all seen it, and we've probably all owned them. These things that are in front of houses, and they look like these great, huge stones. And then you go to grab one, and you can pick it up with great ease because it's a fake rock. How many of our lives are like that fake rock? Again, the gimmicks, the ideas of the world, the things from the philosophies of men, none of them deliver. It is only our God that does. Courageously trust in him because he cannot be moved. So the question I'm going to leave with you this morning is this: is the Lord your rock? We've been studying this past year about being holy. We talked about the nature of the Lord's church and how it was founded upon that sure foundation. And this past quarter, we've been talking about having peace, calmness, being still in our souls. This is where it comes from. Jehovah Tsuri, the Lord is our rock. Sing more songs like we did a few moments ago. When we were singing that song, He Leadeth Me. And one of the lines that was in that song was this: even death's cold wave, I will not flee. Can we say even that? Even when the cold wave of death comes, I will not flee. I'm going to trust in Him who leads. That's who our God is. That's who our rock is. If you need help with that this morning, if you're not a Christian, understand the great blessing that comes with having God as your Father. If you've abandoned these things, if you've relied upon other things in this world, come back to Him, because He is sure and steadfast. And we want to help you in any way that we can to help your life be on a solid footing from this day forward. If we can help, please let us know as together we stand and sing.